$25 billion. That's the number a Pentagon official under oath said the Iran war has cost the United States in 8 weeks. Most of it, he said, in munitions. Now hold that figure in one hand. In the other hand, hold this one, $4.44. That is the ADOA national average for a gallon of regular gasoline this morning, May 3rd, 2026. A month ago, the same gallon was $4.09. A week ago, $4.10. The receipt is moving in real time. Most coverage this week is treating these as two stories, the Pentagon story and the gas price story. They are not two stories. They are the same story, paid at two different cash registers, one in Washington, one at the corner of your block. And the household is on the hook for both. In the next 28 minutes, I'll show you 3 things. The actual composition of that $25 billion and why one congressman pushed back and said the real number is closer to 50. The chain that runs from a missile launched over the Persian Gulf to the price of a bag of fertilizer in Nebraska to the price of a box of cereal in Cleveland. And the gap between what the president has said about gas prices and what the Federal Reserve's own economists are projecting. I'm Sarah Ellison. This is the Ellison Brief. Let's start with what actually happened on the record last Wednesday on Capitol Hill, April 29th, House Armed Services Committee. Acting Pentagon Comptroller Jules Hurst III at the witness table. The hearing room is quiet. He delivers the line that nobody in the administration had been willing to say out loud for 64 days. According to reporting from Reuters, NBC News, Politico, and Defense News, Hurst said, quote, approximately, at this day, we are spending about $25 billion on Operation Epic Fury. Most of that is in munitions, end quote. That is a verifiable number from a named official from a public hearing. It is also one, and this is where the analysis has to be careful, when it's only the Defense Department's direct cost. Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, pressed Hurst in the same hearing on whether the $25 billion figure included damage to U.S. bases, equipment losses, and full munitions replacement. CBS News, citing other U.S. officials familiar with the internal accounting, reported the same day that the true total cost is closer to $50 billion when those line items are folded in. So when the president's own Pentagon comptroller says 25 and the president's own officials on background say 50, the honest answer for the analyst is somewhere between those two figures and rising. Now, in fairness, and this is important, the steel-manned defense of the spending goes like this. Iran's nuclear program had advanced to a point where, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency's last published reporting before the war, breakout time was a matter of weeks, not years. A military strike, the argument goes, was the only remaining option to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran, and the cost, $25 billion, $50 billion, whatever the final receipt, is the price of that prevention. That argument is on the record. We will return to it in a moment with the data. But first, the chain. Because the receipt the Pentagon comptroller named is only one of 2 receipts being paid for this war. The other one starts at the Strait of Hormuz. Follow the chain. On February 28th, Iran began obstructing traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Within 72 hours, Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd, 2 of the 3 largest container shipping companies in the world, suspended all transits and began diverting vessels around the Cape of Good Hope. That diversion adds roughly 3,000 nautical miles in 10 to 14 days to an Asia to Europe rotation. According to the United Nations office in Geneva, up to 20,000 seafarers have been stranded in or near the strait since the conflict began. War risk insurance premiums in the Persian Gulf, and here I'm pulling directly from S&P Global Platts shipping coverage, spiked from 1% of hull value to 2.5% within the first week of the war. They have eased back, but they have not gone home. For a very large crude carrier worth $120 million, a single Red Sea or Gulf transit at current premiums runs between $1.2 and $1.8 million in insurance alone. Insurtech Gulf has the math. That cost does not vanish into a corporate ledger. It rolls into the landed cost of every container, every barrel, every ton of grain. And the landed cost rolls into the shelf price. Now follow the chain one more step, because the Strait of Hormuz isn't only an oil choke point. It is also the choke point for roughly 20% of global liquefied natural gas. And here is the piece most coverage skips, a significant share of the world's nitrogen fertilizer supply. Iran is one of the world's largest urea exporters. Qatar's natural gas, which feeds Middle Eastern fertilizer plants, transits the same water. I pulled the DTN Progressive Farmer Retail Fertilizer Survey for the week of April 13th through 17th. The number is $858 per ton for urea. That is up 27% from a month earlier and 49% from the same week 1 year ago. Anhydrous ammonia on the same survey is at $1,114 per ton. Successful Farming, citing USDA economist Sean Arita, has urea up from roughly $450 a ton at the start of the conflict to over $700, and the DTN retail number says it has kept moving since. Now think about what that means for a corn farmer outside Lincoln, Nebraska, planting in the first week of May. $858 a ton on a typical Midwestern application rate of roughly 200 pounds of urea per acre is about $86 in nitrogen alone per acre this season. A year ago, that same acre cost about $58 in nitrogen. On an 800-acre operation, which is roughly the size of the Mendez family farm I'll describe in a moment, that's an additional $22,000 in nitrogen cost in a single planting season that the farmer has to absorb, hedge, or pass through. The pass-through is what shows up on your shelf 6 to 9 months later in a box of cereal, in a half-gallon of milk, in a pound of ground beef. In 2 minutes, I'll show you the number from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that confirms this is already starting. But first, the receipt at the pump. Here is the receipt. The ADA national average for a gallon of regular gasoline on the morning I am recording this is $4.44. That is from the ADA Fuel Prices Dashboard dated May 3rd, 2026. The week ago average was $4.10. The month ago average was $4.09. The pre-war average, the price you were paying in the third week of February, was approximately $2.91. That is a difference of $1.53 per gallon in 8 weeks. Translate that to a household. A 2-vehicle American family driving the national average of roughly 24,000 miles per year combined at 25 miles per gallon burns about 960 gallons of gasoline annually. At $1.53 more per gallon, that is approximately $1,468 in additional fuel cost. Not over the life of the war, but over the next 12 months at current prices per household. Before the grocery pass-through, if you commute farther than the average, if you live in a Sun Belt suburb, drive 40 miles each way, or run a small contracting business out of a pickup, your number is higher. If you have a fleet vehicle and your employer is absorbing the cost, you will eventually feel it in pricing or in payroll. Now to the grocery line. The Bureau of Labor Statistics released the March 2026 Consumer Price Index on April 10th. The headline number, the one cable news led with, was 3.3% year over year, a jump from 2.4% in February. But headlines are written for the front page and the receipts are in the tables. The headline number came from the press release. The actual figure in the BLS table is this. The monthly jump was 0.9% in a single month. That is the largest one-month CPI increase in 3 years. The energy subindex drove most of it. Food at home on a 12-month basis is up 1.9%, modest, but here is the key. That 12-month average reflects 9 months before urea spiked and only 3 months after. The fertilizer pass-through, according to the USDA Economic Research Service and the Dallas Federal Reserve, lands on grocery shelves on a 6 to 12-month lag. The number you are looking at in the BLS table today is not the number you will be looking at in October. The USDA's own April 14th revision raised the 2026 food price forecast in direct response to the conflict. They expect food at home up 2.4%, food away from home up faster. Investigate Midwest has the documentation. So put the two receipts together, $1,468 in additional fuel per household over the next 12 months. Plus a grocery bill that economists say will continue rising into late 2026 and through 2027, and a tax bill that just absorbed $25 billion in Pentagon spending, which, divided across roughly 131 million U.S. households, is approximately $190 per household in 8 weeks in direct Defense Department cost alone. If the true number is $50 billion, it is $380. The policy was framed as protecting American families. The receipt shows it was paid by them. That brings us to what the administration has said versus what the data shows. On Truth Social, on April 19th, the president posted, quote, Iran and subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, I agree to suspend the strikes, end quote. That is the conditional offer. Open the strait, we pause. Iran responded with a 10-point peace proposal delivered through Oman in early May, which the president, by his own statement to reporters at the White House, described as a proposal he is reviewing but is, quote, unhappy with, end quote. Al Jazeera and CBS have the readouts. On the question of gas prices, the administration's framing has been, quote, drop like a rock, end quote, the president's words at a press conference last week, reported by WHSV and others. The argument is straightforward. End the war, oil collapses, gas collapses, household pain ends. Let me steelman that argument fully because it's not a stupid argument. There is genuine historical precedent for sharp oil price reversions following the resolution of Middle East conflicts. The end of the tanker war in 1988 produced a meaningful crude decline within 90 days. The conclusion of major Iraq combat operations in 2003 did the same. If the 10-point Oman proposal results in a verifiable reopening of the Strait of Hormuz with credible enforcement, and if Iranian oil exports resume at pre-war volumes, the futures curve does suggest a meaningful retracement. Now respond with the data. First, the futures market is not currently pricing a rock. Brent crude closed Friday, May 1st at $108.17 per barrel. WTI at $101.94. The December 2026 futures contract is pricing in the high 90s. A decline, yes, but not a collapse. The market, in other words, is not pricing the president's framing. Second, the Federal Reserve. The Federal Open Market Committee, at its April meeting, held the federal funds rate at 3.5% to 3.75% for the third consecutive meeting. The Dallas Federal Reserve published a working paper dated April 17th titled The Impact of the 2026 Iran War on U.S. Inflation. I read the paper. The conclusion, in the author's own words, is that oil-driven inflation pass-through to household expectations is durable. Meaning, even if oil prices retrace, the inflation already baked into the system will take longer to unwind than the price decline itself. The Fed cannot ease into an oil shock. It has to wait until the shock is fully absorbed. That waiting period is paid for, again, by the household through credit card rates, mortgage rates, auto loan rates, and small business credit. Third, and this is the part that doesn't appear in any single Reuters story, the structural cost. According to Bloomberg and the Financial Post, the Iran war has accelerated yuan-denominated oil settlement. Indian refiners settled approximately 60 million barrels of Russian crude in March 2026, partially in yuan and dirhams. China's SAP settlement system processed roughly 590 billion yuan in March throughput. Each dollar of oil traded outside the dollar system is, on the margin, a dollar of demand for U.S. treasuries that doesn't exist. That feeds back, eventually, into U.S. borrowing costs. So when the president says gas will drop like a rock, what the data shows is gas may decline. Inflation expectations will not unwind on the same schedule. The Fed will not cut on the president's timeline. And the structural cost, the dollar's slow erosion in the oil trade, does not reverse at all. That is the gap between the framing and the receipt. What happens next? On current trajectory, three things are likely. First, the 10-point Oman proposal will continue to be negotiated through the next 2 to 3 weeks. The bulk carrier attack reported off Sirak on the Iranian side of the strait in the early hours of May 3rd suggests Tehran is signaling that the cost of refusing the deal is shipping. That is escalation diplomacy. It is also a reminder that the strait remains, for practical purposes, a contested waterway. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Center confirmed the attack. All crew were reported safe. Second, the gas price curve. Analysts at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, cited by CNBC and Reuters, project that even with a full ceasefire by mid-May, retail gasoline will not retrace below $3.75 a gallon before late August. That is 40 cents on average lower than today. Not a rock, a staircase. Third, the grocery aisle. The fertilizer to food pass-through is, on the USDA Economic Research Service's own modeling, a 6 to 12-month process. The $858 urea price hitting Nebraska this week shows up in your cereal aisle in Q4. Watch the BLS Food at Home line item in the August 12th and September 11th CPI releases. Those are the dates. Here is the date that matters most, May 13th. That is when the next U.S. Department of Agriculture WASD report, the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates, drops, and it will contain the first official forecast revision incorporating the post-war fertilizer environment. If that report shows a meaningful downgrade in projected corn or soybean yields, the grocery receipt I just described will arrive faster than the 6-month lag suggests. Let me bring this back to the kitchen table. A senior Pentagon official under oath has said the war has cost $25 billion in 8 weeks. Other officials inside the same administration, on background to CBS News, have said the true number is closer to 50. Whichever number is right, the math comes out the same on your end of the receipt, somewhere between $190 and $380 per U.S. household in direct Defense Department cost, before the pump, before the grocery store, before the credit card rate that the Fed cannot cut. The avoidable decision point on the record was the choice made in late February by the President and his National Security Council to escalate from a sanctions and pressure framework to a kinetic operation before the International Atomic Energy Agency had concluded its final inspection cycle and without a congressional authorization for the use of military force. That choice may or may not, in the long view, prove to have been correct on the nuclear question. The receipt, however, is not in dispute. It is being paid by your household every time you fill the tank, every time you check out at the grocery store, and every time the Fed declines to cut. So here is my question for the comments. What did your gas bill look like the third week of February, and what does it look like this week? Not a percentage, the actual dollar amount. Drop your zip code and the difference. I read every one of these, and they shape the next brief. If this kind of analysis is useful, the kind that adds up the receipts other coverage leaves separate, subscribe. It's the single most useful thing you can do to make this work sustainable. That's the brief. I'll see you on the next one.